All right, everyone. Welcome to Conquering the Canvas online assessments training today. We're going to be working through both new and old quizzes, and because there's so much to cover, we are going to be flying through the material. So if you have questions, put them in the chat, and we have some moderators who are going to help answer some of those questions. And that way we can get through this stuff as fast as possible. Now, if you've never done quizzes before, I would highly recommend that you start with new quizzes. Just because, according to Canvas, we will be switching to new quizzes in July. So if you have a bunch of old classic quizzes, definitely hook up with your ATSD and talk to them about migrating your old quizzes over to the new quizzes sometime in the spring. And hopefully we'll get a more concrete answer from Canvas about when in the summer they'll be transitioning. I'm sure there'll be some lead time, and if we know anything, we'll make announcements out to the public. So going into your course, we'll go into the quizzes area. And if you already have old quizzes here, you do have underneath these three dots the ability to migrate. And that's the option you're going to choose to migrate it over to the new quizzes. Again, you can talk with your ATSD and they can walk through that with you. What you see here are groups of quizzes that I've created. And you can put them into different groups. And if you have assignment groups, weighted groups, because you're counting quizzes as a certain percentage of your grade, you can put those into assignment groups, and that's how they can be weighted out. We're going to jump straight into creating a quiz. So if you hit the plus quiz button up here, notice in Canvas it's blue and has a plus sign. That's pretty consistent throughout Canvas, whether it's an assignment, discussion, or a quiz. You'll be prompted here for classic quizzes or new quizzes. Again, if you're creating a whole new one, I would highly recommend you start off with new quizzes. If you're want to, though, we're going to go quickly through classic quizzes. Maybe there's something that you didn't know that was in there as far as the options go. So the first thing you want to do is, of course, give it a new title up here. And down here is the Rich Content Editor. So if you ever hear us refer to Rich Content Editor or RCE, that's this big guy here. And this is where you pretty much put in your directions. You want to tell your students, when it's available, or how long they have, and if they have any directions about files or anything you're kind of doing that's special with the quiz, you want to give those information here. In this new RCE, you have all these abilities to change the font and bold and underline, italics, highlighting, colors. Here you can put out links, you can put out pictures, you can put out media files, documents. You can link to documents in your box folder. You can put videos in here from Panopto, and there's some other plugins that you have. We're not going to go through all of these today because of the time crunch that we have, but all of those are available. Down here, this is really important. This is your accessibility checker. So if you do make this stuff nice and fancy, you want to check your accessibility, and it will check things like color contrast and alt text for your pictures to make sure those students who might need that will be covered. The other thing down here is your switch to HTML editor. So if you're good at HTML or need to make some edits in that, you click that little button, and you can type or text or copy and paste HTML into this box, and you can click it again, and it'll take you back to the WYSIWYG, which is what you see is what you get, and that would be where all of your what the GUI interface looks like. Down here in setting some options, we do have different types of quizzes. We have practice quizzes, which are pretty much just for information purposes, right? It's not counting towards the grade. It just kind of is like a temperature check. You have a graded quiz, which is your typical one. You do have graded surveys and ungraded surveys that you can poll your students and ask them questions for doing. Most of the time, graded surveys are kind of like just a couple of points to give them for doing it. Your assignment group, if we talked, like I briefly mentioned earlier, if you have weighted assignment groups, like quizzes are worth a certain percentage, you can go ahead and drop it in that quizzes assignment group there. With your questions, you can shuffle answers. This is really good for helping to deter cheating, instead of having people saying, question 1 is C, question 2 is B, and telling their friends. If you shuffle answers, at least those answers will be different letters. The one caveat I'll tell you with shuffling answers is if you use things like some of your answers might be both A and C are correct, or all of the above are correct. You need to change your verbiage because when it shuffles them, it won't be A and C every time. And all of the above won't be all the above. You need to change it to something like all of these are correct. You can set a time limit for your quiz, which we highly recommend. You can click here, click time limit, and go ahead and put it in and say 45 minutes, which is about what we have today. Put that time limit in there, and whenever students start a quiz, they have 45 minutes till countdown with one exception, and I'll get to that here in a second. With quizzes, especially practice quizzes or ungraded quizzes, or even graded ones that you just really want to give them a chance, you can't allow for multiple attempts, and you can choose what score you keep. So you can keep the last score that they make, the highest score they make, or you can average out all the different scores that they have. You choose the allow attempts, and you can choose exactly how many attempts you want them to have. So in this case, I've given them 5 attempts, and I'll take the average of all 5 of those scores. Down here is where you let students see their feedback. And feedback is basically letting them see the correct answers and any feedback you've typed in on each question. So by default, it lets the students see their feedback, including their correct answers, after they finish the quiz. You can say after their last attempt or after each attempt, or you can release them on a certain date and only give them the correct answers after the due date of the quiz. You can also turn around and hide the correct answers a couple of days later so that they're not going back and sharing the answers with their friends. But once the quiz is over, you have those options there set for them when the quiz is over. You can show one question at a time. And again, this is one of those anti-cheating kind of helps, where instead of giving them the whole 10, 20 questions at one time, where they could take screen grabs or take pictures of the whole quiz, showing it one at a time would make them take about 20 individual pictures. It would just slow them down a bit. And hopefully the one at a time question mixed in with the time limit will help deter that kind of cheating. Again, all these kind of anti-cheat things are just deterrents. A lot of times the kids are very ingenuitive and determined, so you can't stop them all. You can set an access code restriction. So if you're going to throw this quiz during class time and you want to make it available and everything, but you want to wait and give them the access code on like the 5th slide of your presentation, you can do that here. At SMU, we have so many different endpoints for the Wi-Fi and things like that. We do not do filtering IP, especially with people off campus these days. So you will not use this option. When assigning the quiz, the default is to assign it to everyone. The big thing about this area here, there are 2 main features. Normally you would set a due date, so I'll set it for Friday. You can set the available and until date. This means that the quiz will become available on this date to be clicked on. So I'm going to choose Monday. And on Friday, I want it to shut down at the same time. So once the due date is passed, this quiz will close down. You can set this until date later, and that allows you to accept late assignments past the due date. So I could set it for Saturday and still allow people to get in, but it would be considered late. At the very most, you want to match the time with the due date so it shuts down at the same time. The other important thing down here to note is that the until date trumps the timer. So if you made this available, if you're trying to really shut it down and say, okay, I want it to be, on Friday, I have class start at 10 a.m. and I'm going to put that in here. And I want this thing to shut down at 11 a.m. That's an hour, right? So if you do that, then if some student comes in here and starts this quiz at 10:30, they only get 30 minutes. This until date trumps everything else. So if they start late, then they lose that timer doesn't matter. When the until date hits, it will shut down and submit the quiz for them, no matter if they have time left on the timer or not. So be very careful with the until date. The other thing to note down here is if you need to set up a different time for someone to take a quiz, or if you're trying to set up a different time for sections, like your Monday, Wednesday section, the quiz is on Monday, and your Tuesday, Thursday section, the quiz is on Tuesday, you click add, and you can choose either by section, or you can choose a particular student and say this particular student was out for an athletic event, so I'm going to give them one more day, and it's going to be due on the 16th. I'm going to shut it down on the 16th, but I can still open it up on Monday. So this will allow Marcia here to take it on until this time, and everyone else gets the normal time. So that's how you can set multiple due dates for a quiz. Up here at the top, you have a questions tab and classic quizzes where you can set up new questions. We highly recommend if you're creating an old quiz like this, that you should set up the questions in a question bank and shuffle your questions. And how you shuffle questions is simply by pulling them from the question bank. And usually, say, for example, you'll have 20 questions in the question bank, but the quiz is only 10 questions long. So you say pull 10 questions from my 20 question bank, and it'll shuffle those questions randomly and everyone will have a slightly different quiz. If you have more questions about shuffling and question banks, there are sessions for question banks later this week, and you can always reach out to your ATSD. So setting up a new question right here.
Before you go further, can we talk about the DAS students and how to moderate?
We'll get to moderation at the end.
Okay.
So to set up new question types, you come here and you can choose all the different question types that you have for classic quizzes. New quizzes has different question types, some more advanced and some are missing. It's just different. So we'll look at those a little bit later. But there are some question types that can be automatically graded, like multiple choice, true, false, and for the most part, fill in the blank. But there are some question types that cannot be automatically graded, like essay questions and some of the formula questions, file upload questions. Those questions you will have to come in and grade by hand. So whereas the quiz will make grade 3/4 of it automatically, you'll still need to come grade those question types to make sure the students get the full score. Once you've chosen your question type, all this information down here will change based off the question type. Like this is multiple choice, so we have multiple answers. If it were fill in the blank, you'd have that option here. If it were true, false, you would only have true, false. But you can choose with the little arrow which one is the correct answer, so that's what I'll choose. You type in all your directions here, and it's the normal RCE, so you can do all your fancy editing, including putting in pictures and links and that kind of thing. Be careful with links if you're going to use Lockdown Browser, because Lockdown Browser will lock it down to where you can't go outside of this unless you whitelist those links. And if you have questions about whitelisting and Lockdown Browser so that they can see them, again, reach out to your ATSD. Here you can put in your answers, and you mark which answer is correct. And if you chose to shuffle your answers, the correct tag will stay with that answer. It'll just be shuffled around, A, B, C, D, that kind of thing. All these little boxes here are how you can provide feedback. So this would be feedback for this answer. This would be feedback for this answer, and so on. These feedbacks down here are for the question overall, as opposed to the individual answers. Once you've decided that that's it, you hit update question, and your question is now listed here. If you want to edit it, you hit the pencil icon and you can go in and edit it. If you've already created a question bank, you can go to find questions and you can search from the question banks that you have and simply choose the questions that you want and say add, and it adds them to your quiz. If you want to create a group of questions, which is what we talked about by pulling questions, you could say that I'm going to pull 3 questions worth 1 point apiece from this question bank, and I've chosen it, and I choose that one and say select. And now I've got a small group here where it'll pull 3 more questions worth 1 point apiece. Again, question banks, we have a different session on that, so I'm not going to go any deeper into this today. But we do have a different session coming up about question banks where we'll get into more detail about it. So with regular quizzes here, you have save and publish. This is normal across Canvas. Save is a draft, so that only you can see it as the instructor, but save and publish will make it available to the students.
Back to questions right quick.
The availability date, then the students will not be able to click on the link, even though they can see it, until it's available.
With file upload questions, will that work with Lockdown Browser?
Lockdown Browser will not let them search their own computer for files. You can do file links, like they can look at other files if you have them listed, or if you put them in box and you link to those files and you whitelist that link, you can have them look at files, but it can't browse their computer looking for a file to upload. If you have files like Excel and stuff, Lockdown Browser has an Excel kind of function that'll allow them to do the work in Excel in a separate tab and then transfer the answer over. But that's a little more in depth. Again, we'll have to reach out to your ATSD for that kind of stuff. So now that you have questions and you have all your details filled out, you can hit save or save and publish. And I'm going to get rid of this, and I'll show you a classic quiz that I currently have. So here's my current quiz. This is what it'll look like. You have your directions. Information is listed to the students and their due dates and time. This is exactly what a student would see, so they know everything about the quiz before they jump in. As an instructor, you can preview the quiz and go through the quiz and mark all the answers and that kind of thing and see the results. You can go into quiz statistics. So when students have taken your quiz, your graph and everything there will look far more impressive as mine because I just kind of messed around with it and got just one score in here. But you'll be able to see the scores, and they'll have different bars as it goes across the 100%. You'll be able to see your high score, your low score, your average score, your standard deviation, all that kind of good stuff. And it'll even break it down per question. You'll have a discrimination index, and it'll tell you whether it was a good question or a bad question kind of thing with that index. You'll be able to see how many respondents got the question right and wrong, and a ton of detailed information here. All of that information you can download with a student analysis or an item analysis, and one that'll be based off students. This will be based off of questions. And you can see them all there. If you've cross-listed your courses and you have a ton of students in your classes, you can pull it down a section filter and look at each section individually, your Monday, Wednesday versus your Tuesday, Thursday kind of thing. And you can break down these quiz statistics that way. For the question earlier, we talked about moderating a quiz. Moderating a quiz is for students who have need extra attempts or need a little extra time. You can come in here and you can look at students. You can see their attempts they've made, how long it took them to take their quiz, how many attempts they have left if you've allowed multiple attempts, and what their score was. If they come in here and you can moderate, you can add extra attempts or extra time for every attempt, and you can do this ahead of time. So if you know a student needs extra time, you can put the time in here. But please note, this is the extra time, not the total time. So if you gave them an hour to take the quiz, they need an extra 30 minutes. You just put in 30 minutes. Don't put in the whole 90. Otherwise, they'd get 90 plus 60. So just put in the extra time they need and click save. And then next time they will get an extra 30 minutes per attempt to take the quiz. One of the caveats is we found in the moderating, if you try and add time, add extra attempts and time while they're taking the quiz, sometimes it works. And it works in old quizzes, but not in new quizzes. You have to do this. You have to set the new quiz stuff up before the quizzes are taken. You can add extra attempts after the fact, but not extra time while they're taking the quiz. So that's your basic on moderator. If you've got a bunch of students, you can type in here and do a little bit of a search and say filter, and it'll filter down to that student. So if you have a lot of students in a class, it's just a quick way to filter out. All right. So now we'll switch over to new quizzing. And I know I'm going really fast. I'm trying to get through this. So hopefully we can have a little bit of time to answer some questions at the end, but there's just a lot of information. So you come in here, you choose new quizzes if you're going to create a new quiz for the first time. And the very first time you do a new quiz, it's going to look a lot the same, except for this box here where it says submission type. And new quizzes are still technically external tools. They're not, it's not built in yet. It's kind of an extra thing because we haven't switched over to new quizzes. And like we mentioned earlier, Canvas currently has that. Our switch date is sometime in the summer in July. So again, you give it a title up here. With the new quiz, with the old quizzes, the points are automatically assigned by the number of questions and the value you gave to each question, right? So if you make a 20 question quiz and you make them 1 point apiece, then automatically your points are worth 20, right? In new quizzes, you can tell it what level of points you want, no matter how many questions you've assigned. And Canvas will do the math arbitrarily, right? Like I'll keep it simple. If you make this worth 100 points and then you do 10 questions, no matter what you put as the total, it will go, you got 9 out of 10, that's a 90%. So you get a 90. So it'll do the math for you there. Again, you can choose your type. So I'm going to put this in the quizzes assignment group. I'm going to make this worth points. You do have other options like percentage and complete, incomplete, and that kind of thing. I won't go deep into this, but percentage is fairly easy. Points is fairly easy. Complete, incomplete. If they do it at all and you mark them as complete, they get all the credit. And if they get incomplete, they get none of the credit. Letter grade will require you to create a grading scheme, which you can do so right here, but we won't get into that today. By default, we have put in the Smu grading scheme into the all courses at SMU. If you create this as sort of a kind of a temperature check or a practice, you can choose this box that says do not count it towards the final grade. The students will then still get a grade so they know how they did, and more like an evaluation, but it won't actually count towards their grade. Do not change any of the submission stuff before you could, but now it looks like they finally blocked it out. That's good. Submission attempts, again, you can give them options, right? You can let them take it a few times, or you can limit it to just one. Or you can even choose unlimited, and they can take it over and over and over as long as the quiz is available. Down here, you can choose anonymous grading. That way, if there's essay questions and that kind of thing, TA's names or whoever the grader is would be hidden from the student if that's important. And you can anonymize yourself in general to where you won't see the students' names when you have to go in and grade. Again, the only reason you would have to grade is if you had those questions that require you to hand grade, like essay questions. But if you anonymize it to yourself, you won't see student names. You'll just see student 1, student 2, student 3, that kind of thing. Assign to is exactly the same way as it was before. You put in a due date, available, and until. Just again, remember that until date trumps everything, even timers. Okay. So once you hit save, it'll take you into the main part of building the quiz. I'm going to hit cancel and get out of here. And I can show you one that I've already created. So here's a quiz. Over here on the left-hand side, you have kind of a quick navigation. So you can quickly jump down to question 9 and click it, and it'll jump you down to question 9. You can look through all of these things real quick and find the question that you want once this is all built out. You can jump back to the title, and you can put in the instructions here. The title is here. So it's just a little slightly different in the navigation and the way it's laid out. I'm going to minimize that so we have more space here. To edit questions, it's the same pencil icon over here on the right-hand side. So I can edit this multiple choice question right here. And it will warn me that I have already had students take this quiz. So I can either edit a copy of this question so I'm not messing with the same question, or I can jump out of it. So if I go down here to the bottom, everywhere you see a plus sign, you can add a question in between the other questions. So if I wanted to, between 4 and 5, I want to add a different question, I could come in here and I can choose like a hotspot question. And I can type in my question, upload my picture that I want to be a hotspot, and I draw on it the hotspot that I want them to click on. Now, a hotspot question is like a heat map. So for example, if I had the picture of the state of Texas on there, then I could draw, say, where is the capital? And I would draw a little hotspot where Austin is on the map. And then students who clicked within that hotspot of Austin would get the question correct. And if they clicked on the area where Houston is, they would get the question incorrect. So that's what a hotspot question is. Let me show you some of the other question types. You have categorization. So what students would do, it's kind of like mapping. It's kind of like matching, where you might put different types of bonds. You know, like in chemistry, you might put, things that are polybonds, right? You could put on one side and then have it put into the category. Like, if you have like isopropyl alcohol on one side, you want to put it into carbon bonds on the right-hand side, you can do that. If you're trying to put in things like, like health class, respiratory system, and you list out, lungs, they could put it in the respiratory system category and that kind of thing. So that's what a categorization question would do for you. So we have multiple choice questions you can see listed here. Here's a question where in a unique way, I set up a grid. I put in a table in the RCE, and then I was able to put in the different designs or the different graphs here. And in the pictures, I've labeled them so I know which one is which. And then I've asked the students, which graph is correct based off this formula, and they would actually choose which graph by the way I've labeled them. So that's just a different way you can answer, do a question there. And you have each question type comes with its own question options. So you can allow an on-screen calculator if you have a formula question and you want to let them use the calculator for this particular one. If you want to, vary points by answer with this particular question type, you can click this box and you can make the questions like this is correct. If you've taken it out to 3 decimal places, and this one's less correct because they only took it out to 1 decimal place, you could do something like that where you can give different quotients or different answers. We won't worry about outcomes anymore, but do note here in item banking, that each question, if you want to add it to a bank, which we highly recommend, you add it to a bank from the question if you're creating the quiz with the questions in it. If you wanted to do something like we talked about earlier with like classic quizzes, where you want to be able to pull the questions, then we recommend that you go to your item banks here, and you'll want to create a bank. And then inside that bank, you would actually create the questions and then pull them into the quiz. In this particular quiz, I've put the questions directly into the quiz as opposed to pulling them from a bank and shuffling them. So one of the other important, interesting question types is a stimulus, which is this question here. So you can see that it's labeled questions 12 through 25 because it has, and what you do is you put a stimulus on the left-hand side. Let's say you're doing reading comprehension. You would put the paragraphs on the left-hand side, and then you would simply add questions, and they would show up on the right-hand side pertaining particularly to the stimulus. They would answer all those questions, and then they would move on to regular questions again. So fill in the blank, you know, you can put in blanks in there and give them deviations, like all the different naming types, you know, like Marco Polo, Mr. Polo, M Polo, like you could do all those kind of variations to try and give them the best chance at getting the question correct. You do have ordering questions, which is kind of neat. You can put in different options here and put them in the correct order. And then when you save it, students would get a shuffled version, and they would have to drag the answers around and put them in the correct order. So say, for example, you're teaching history class, and you list like the 4 wars, and you say Revolutionary War, Civil War, Vietnam War, and World War II. They would have to rearrange those in order from, you know, oldest date to newest date, or however you told them to order it. And if they get that correct, then they get the points for the question. So, oh, sorry. And down here, you can set points. Again, it will do the math for you, but if one question is worth 5 points and one question is worth 1 point, then they get more credit for the 5-point question than they did the 1-point question. And the little bubbles here allow you to provide feedback. So you can give feedback for a correct answer, feedback for an incorrect answer, and provide general feedback for the entire question. You know, like what page it was on or what topic it was on. You can do all of that kind of feedback here. And when students review their quiz and see whether or not they got the right or wrong answers, then they would also see any of the feedback that you've put in here for that particular question as well. And all that part is automated so they can read through it as necessary. If you do an essay question, which is here is an example of an essay question, then students get a box like this. I'm not going to open this, but they get a box that looks like the RCE that you and I have seen all over the place, and they would be able to type in their answers here. You would have to then come in and assign the points for this particular question type. If you're doing questions like this, and you want to look at your item banks, I can come in here, I can create a new bank. I can look at any particular bank that I have. And here's all the questions that I have in this bank. I can edit any of these I want. I can add questions to these. I can even come down here and duplicate them or move them and say, I want to move this question to a new bank and keep a copy in this bank. So I can create a copy of it in a new bank, or I can just move it straight to a new bank and take it out of this one. So it's pretty easy to rearrange these questions. If you want to look at a question, you just hit the little down arrow and it'll open it up. And it says the declaration, like that question in particular. If I edit it, you can see here that I've given, it's a drop-down question. And the question is, the Declaration of Independence was signed in, and I've given the correct answer there. And you can add multiple distractors and mark which one is correct. And that's how a student would get that question correct or not. All right. If you want to delete questions, it's just simple. It's the little icon here. And when you're creating your questions, we highly recommend that you actually label the questions. So let me just do a matching one real quick. So up here, the question title, you can title the question, right? So if I just say matching, then if I title it something that will, and I can remember later, then when I'm searching for a question later, I can type in different criteria and it will search the question titles and the question itself and allow me to quickly search through an entire item bank for that particular question. So for new quizzes, again, you have the navigation on the left-hand side. You can jump to any question that you want. You can also pull in the questions, and you can create questions on the fly. If you want to pull in a question, you click on the little item bank there, and you can click it open. Choose what item bank that you might want to pull a question from. And I could say, add this one to the quiz. And boom, there, it's automatically added to the quiz. We'll go into settings real quick. So for new quizzes, you do have some of the same settings like shuffle questions, shuffle answers. Shuffle questions, even if you've built the questions onto the quiz, like we saw there on the quiz I just have open right now, it will shuffle all those questions around and shuffle the answers within the quiz, each question if I chose. You would need to choose one question at a time if that's something you want to do. Again, the same access code, time limits, setting the time limitations for the students there. We don't use IP filtering. You can allow the calculator for the entire quiz if you want, or like you saw in each question, you can't allow that calculator for that particular question. You cannot use that option if you're going to use Lockdown Browser. Lockdown Browser has its own calculator, which you can allow in the settings in there. You can allow for multiple attempts here, and I could choose, highest, lowest, average, just like we did before. We can even, on this one, we can even say, you can require that they wait 15 minutes between each attempt. That way they're not just gaming the system, trying to remember the answers in their head as quickly as they possibly can and just taking the quiz over and over and over until they get 100. But if you do make them wait in between, definitely make sure that the quiz is available for a good enough amount of time so that will allow them to do that. Restricting student view. Again, these are all the options about letting them see the correct answers or not. You can choose whether or not you want to show, the points possible, the points awarded, whether or not you want them to see the responses, the correct and incorrect answers, and all that kind of feedback. The only thing that new quizzes does not have yet is timing on that feedback. We can't choose a date like we did in classic quizzes just yet. Once students have taken this quiz, you will have some basic reports like quiz and item analysis. It's very similar to what we were looking at earlier. You'll get a bunch of bars where all the students' scores have been across here. And again, yours will be much more impressive than my one student here. You'll get an item analysis per question, and you can break it down and see, who scored what, who guessed what questions were, what did most people choose as an answer, all throughout this, and your total number of students who have taken it. You have your discrimination index here and your difficulty index per question as well. On reports, we won't use outcomes analysis anymore. We'll be getting a new outcome tool rolling out this spring. Here in moderate, it looks very similar. You have your attempts and your scores and your logs, and you can look and see, oh, someone's taking my quiz. Right now, I can look at a log of someone who took the quiz and see, when they got in, when they possibly answered this question or that question. I can look and say, okay, that was the answer for that question that they chose. And the logs are pretty in depth as far as each student goes. So if it comes to investigation, that's a nice thing to have. You can come down here and choose moderate for someone who's taking a quiz. I could allow them extra attempt, or I could give them time adjustments and say, I can remove it entirely, or I can say give additional time, and I would just put in the additional time as necessary. One of the great things about moderating a quiz this way is if you do set accommodations, like a time multiplier on someone who hasn't taken it yet, then you can, that will stick with them. So the time multiplier of time and a half will stick with this student here on any of the new quizzes. So you shouldn't have to do it every time you set up a new quiz. It should stay with them. So I'm going to return back to my quizzes. And that was a lockdown browser one. So if I choose a different quiz, so here is my hotspot question I talked about earlier. And I say, where is Texas? And they have to click somewhere in this blue area in order to get the question right. If I go up there to moderate, you could see that this was the student I set the moderation for before, and they still have their time multiplier at 1.5. Let me get back to the speed grader. So if you pick a new quiz, you'll notice that it jumps directly into the new quiz. Like you can't get to those settings from here. So what you have to do on a new quiz, and a new quiz is one that's got a solid icon, whereas old classic quizzes have the outlines. If I choose this, I can choose edit here, and I can get back to those other options like due date and that kind of thing that I had set earlier. So I'm going to pick a classic quiz real quick and go into the speed grader for that quiz. And this is where you can jump in and do, put in adjust points or grade, like the essay questions that you'll have to come in and grade. It's just a quick way to do it because you can come in here, give the points allotted for the essay question and move over to the next student. You can add in comments, and this will be a comment on that particular question. If you want to add comments over here, you can add comments to the entire quiz. If you wanted to set up a rubric for a quiz, you could do it here, but it's really more of a fun fact. The grade is set up by the points you gave it. So rubrics are more like evaluation in this sense. One of the things we want to mention here is fudge points. And fudge points is kind of sort of like extra credit, or maybe credit you want to give them because one of the questions was kind of goofy the way you wrote it. So for example, if I did that arranging question about putting the wars in the right order, and I actually put, the Civil War before the Revolutionary War, and even though I gave them partial credit, I want to go and give everybody at least 1 point because I put it in the wrong order. You could come in down here, and for each person, I could give fudge points for that. Or for this particular student who's doing it, who picked the correct answer, but maybe there was a more correct answer and you can't do partial credit on that particular question type, that's also where fudge points can come into play. And there also fudge points will come into play if you want to give extra credit, maybe for a question that you gave 0 points to. You could use fudge points to give extra credit for a quiz as well. So all that is in here. If you get into a quiz where you have picked like something that can be automatically regraded, like say multiple choice, and you said the correct answer was Vietnam War, when the correct answer was actually the Civil War, you can go in and fix that on the quiz and mark the correct answer. And Canvas will warn you, people have already taken this quiz. Do you want to regrade all the quizzes? And you can say yes, and it will automatically fix give people credit where they had credit and take away points where they shouldn't have gotten credit. If it's a question type that it can automatically grade. Inside classic quizzes, inside the speed grader, you can also view the logs for the quiz here. And if you could see when they attempted, when they answered, when they left out. But the one thing I want to take note of is in some of these logs, you'll see like student stopped the quiz or something like that, and they'll have like a little red X next to it. That doesn't necessarily mean they stopped taking the quiz. It means they paused and didn't move their mouse around at all for a good while. Maybe they were reading or thinking pretty hard or something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean that they jumped out of the quiz. All right. So once I'm happy with looking at this particular student, I can just click the right arrow and go to my next available student who might have taken the quiz. Inside SpeedGrader, they would have green check marks when they've all been graded. or they have orange dots when they need to be graded. Inside your grade book, when it comes to quizzes, if you haven't graded a quiz entirely, like for assignments, you see the little paper icon, but there's a submission you haven't graded. But for quizzes, you'll see that little rocket ship icon. And I think maybe have done this training enough times to where I've done all the grading for it. But you would see an icon instead of a piece of paper, it would be that same rocket ship looking icon. And what that basically tells you is that you need to go in and grade that quiz. There's a question, you would see this little icon right here. There is a question in there that needs your attention. Usually that's one of those questions that cannot be automatically graded, like a essay question. Oftentimes at the end of the semester, we will get people asking us questions about the grades and why aren't they correct, and Canvas is not grading the grade books correctly and all this kind of stuff. And 9 times out of 10, we will see these little rocket ship icons in the grade book. And that just means that there are questions that the instructor has failed to grade or give points for. And that's why the student's grade might be off a little bit. Okay, so I have blown through that very quickly. We have about 8 minutes. Steve, if there were questions, I saw the chat was going crazy.
I think most were answered.
Okay. And Ms. Walter, too, if you saw something or wanted something mentioned that I didn't.
So there's one question that we did not answer in the chat, and it is, for question types, is there any question type that supports students submitting specially formatted textual input such as code or markdown?
So there are
Computer code.
directly, like, there is no direct question for specific types of code. You can do like an essay question and have them copy and paste their code, and it should keep the formatting. We've done that in previous courses. But that's probably the best you're going to get. If they're going to type out code, I would have them probably PDF it so it can make sure to keep all of the spacing and formatting that you're looking for, and do a file upload question and have them upload that PDF. The downside with uploading PDFs is using Lockdown Browser. It blocks the searching of a computer.
Can you show a regrade or changing of point values that were incorrectly assigned on a quiz after the student has taken it?
Maybe. I don't have actual students in my quiz. Let's see if I can find one real quick. But ask more questions while I'm looking for a quiz that might work.
Another question was, how can the gradebook view for students be suppressed? And I think we'll go more in depth into that in the gradebook grading and gradebook session. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but if that is just asking how to hide what the students scored or what the correct answers were, that was in that student feedback section on the settings of yes. Right, so if you don't have that checked, they can't even see what they got right and wrong, much less what was the right answer.
Right. So if you want to suppress them seeing how they did in the quiz so they can't share the right and wrong answers, that would be in these settings here. You can't hide the gradebook from students entirely. You can hide subtotals from students, but that's about all you can hide.
Can I ask a follow-up about the code question type?
Sure.
So I'm sure that you can understand that having students type code then PDF it would really slow down quiz taking.
Absolutely.
So is there a way to, I don't know, ask Canvas? I mean, we can't be the only school that teaches computer science that wants students to be able to write code or math or physics or, anything computational. So is there a way to check with Canvas to see like if there's computer science extension pack for quizzes or something that would support students writing code or mathematical, markdown, LaTeX, other things like that are rich, sort of rich text or formatted text?
Yeah, absolutely. If you could just put in a help desk ticket so it gets in my queue, and then I'll reach out to Canvas and ask. I know that we've done rich context, allow them to view essay questions so they can type in the rich context editor themselves. We've done PDFs in the past. We've also allowed students to build their code in GitHub and then put in a essay question type or a fill in the blank type and allow them to submit the URL to the GitHub address so that you could click the link and then look at their code there. So those are the three we've used in the past, but I'd be happy to reach out and see if there's some kind of plugin.
Okay, thank you.
What's the difference between a question bank and a question group?
Okay. So real quick, here's those regrade options. I've gone into this quiz and I've marked this answer and this answer as correct. So if I go in and mark a different one, it'll give me these regrade options here, and it'll allow me to choose whether I want to award everybody the correct answers or only award points for the correct answer or give everyone full credit, or I can just sneakily say update the question without telling anybody. So there are your four options for a regrade. And so the difference between a question group and an item bank, is that right, Steve?
I believe so. Well, a question bank, item bank, depends on what flavor.
Yeah, so they call them different things from old quizzes to new quizzes.
Can I interrupt? I don't think that's what she's asking. So question bank is a grouping of questions. A question group you can pull from a bank or create on the fly. So a question group, you can link to a bank and say, I want this group of questions to pick 5 questions out of this bank that has 10 questions. Or you can create a question group and type in those questions right there.
Yeah, right. Just like the one at the bottom that says training group, Gwen. Cassidy, you might, do we need to mention the fact that the item banks belong to one person?
So
I'm going to mention that in the item and question banks session on Thursday, but we do have 3 minutes if you want to.
So 2 things about item banks real quick. The item banks inside where you would build an item bank inside classic quizzes belong to the course, which means if you're co-teaching, both you and the co-teacher can see it. When you're using a new quiz, that actually belongs to you, the person who creates it, which means your co-teacher can't see it. Your TA can't see it. You would have to share that with them in order to let them see that group of questions or that item bank. The good advantage about the new quizzes is that those item banks go with you from term to term to term. So you'll be able to use those item banks in other courses quite easily. So that'll be a change in how you manage those moving forward. Okay. So, and one last thing I'll mention, if I were to create a quiz from scratch, then I would go in and fill out the details, like the title and all that kind of thing. But I would create the questions inside the item bank and then pull from the item bank so that the questions get shuffled and then I could choose to shuffle the answers if I wanted to. So I wouldn't actually, with the classic quizzes, I wouldn't actually create the questions on the quiz. I would create them in an item bank first and then create my quiz and pull from that item bank. So that was my last piece of advice. And I want to thank you guys for showing up today and attending this session. If there's questions that we missed, feel free to put in a help desk ticket or reach out to your ATSD and we'll all get back to you as soon as we can. Again, thank you.